So I'm going to talk a little bit about acrylic paints today because that's what I usually use, sometimes with some emulsions or some glazes or something thrown in for a bit of interest. And I'm working on the architectural painting of the hotel, which is one that I'm doing just for me. So it's not one that's for a commission or for a specific show. So it's quite nice. I feel absolutely no pressure at all in regards to what it's going to turn out like because it's purely for the kind of sake of doing something experimental that I'm doing this. So the paints that I'm using are acrylics, and what I've done is I've started this painting a few days ago. So I always prime my canvas first, usually with emulsion, sometimes with some PVA mixed in to make it a little bit thicker. Then I would sketch out the sort of the outlines of what I wanted, the kind of basic shapes with very little detail, just to kind of give me an area of where the blocks of colour are. Then I would work with the acrylics and I would block in the sections of colour that I wanted. So this went to a sort of whitish colour, and this was a sort of pale green, and then the colours down here, and obviously the dark areas where there's going to be the tree and the lamp as well on the side. So the acrylics that I'm using for this have been out for a couple of days. You can see them in the palette. Some of them now, because they have been out so long, have gone really dry, and they're at the stage where they would just peel out really easily. They sort of go very, very plasticky, almost a bit like chewing gum when it's dry. They sort of just come out in pieces like this. I think this is quite good because it makes it quite easy to clean your palettes. But what I do, I put my paint out. When I finish painting for the day, I will just wrap this in cling film or put a plastic bag around it, and that means I can keep the paint and I can work on it the next day. So if I've got colours that I've mixed, they're kind of still in there and they're going to stay usable. In a sort of northern British climate, they're not going to get so hot that they're going to dry out anytime soon if they're wrapped up, so I can work on it for quite a while. When I start working on the painting, I'm using the acrylics really thickly. People that have used acrylics will know that you can use them almost like an oil paint, and you can also use them like a watercolour depending on what effect you want to get. So I tend to mix the two sort of practices when I'm painting. So when I started out, I was applying the paint really thickly. And in a way, if it has been open for a few days and it's gone a bit thicker, then that's great. You know, that's kind of ideally how you want it then. Now I'm sort of doing some washes to put some shade and tone onto these details down here on the columns. And so I'm wanting to use them more like a watercolour. So I'm having to add quite a lot of water to the paint to get it to the sort of the level that I want. I was painting these kind of lines in here just to kind of define some of the carved work on the stones. And then I was sort of picking out some detail on the pillars. The two pillars in the middle are sort of multi-layered, and they have a section at the side which is in shadow. So I've started to pick that out here. So if I use this one as an example, they sort of have a line that comes down like this, and then these two side pieces are in shadow, so you can see the amount of water that I'm using and how I'm really thinning the paint. The nice thing is, because of the acrylic that's already on there, this is going on to almost a slightly water resistant background, because acrylic paint is slightly water resistant when it dries. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's waterproof, but it's not too bad. It's pretty good with coping with moisture. And because of that, that means I can use these sort of washes over the top, and I can really spread the paint out once it's on. You know, this would be more difficult to do if sort of this was pure watercolour paint, because it would be probably making more of a mess of what was underneath. Of course, if you do a lot of washes like this, it does tend to start to smudge if you keep sort of putting wash over wash. But because this is wash going over quite thick paint, it's going on pretty well, it's going on okay. You can also see what it's doing, which I'm quite liking the effect of here, is it's starting to pick out some of the detail of the canvas, so some of the texture that there is in the canvas underneath is starting to show up in the wash. which for a painting like this is fine. I think it can be very effective. It annoys me a little bit in portraits when I start to get this kind of canvas effect on people's skin, so I tend to probably use the wash technique slightly less with portraits, although it does still come in very handy for getting kind of subtle tones and shadows when you get sort of a shadow cast across someone's face. Their skin isn't necessarily a different colour, it just has a shadow over it, so you can put a kind of bluey, greyy wash over and get quite a nice effect. So yeah, you can see just how versatile acrylic paints are, which obviously if there's something you use yourself, you'll know all about this. They're a really great paint, whether you are someone that's painted for years and you're very professional, or whether you are someone that's just starting out, because they allow you that range of techniques. Some artists will use acrylics and they'll do everything as if it's oil paints. So they'll have very, very thick canvases and it becomes almost like a kind of textural relief because there's so much paint on the canvas. It was really, really thick and expressive, like the kind of brush marks that Van Gogh was getting in his work. Other artists will use acrylics and they'll do it almost purely like watercolour right the way through. It's really up to you. What I really like about them is having the kind of the luxury of one type of paint that allows me to do both, because then I can pick and choose from a range of techniques, basically wherever I think it's appropriate, either for the subject matter or for the particular area of the painting. It's certainly nice to have the option. When I finish this painting off, I'm going to have to work much heavier again, because this tree here actually comes right down almost over this entire section of the building, so I'm going to have lots of leaves quite heavily here, and there's also some huge iron gates which you can just kind of see on the photograph that I'm working from in front of this section of the building, so that's going to be on there as well, and that will probably be much thicker. So I've kind of got the thicker paint with the wash over the top, and then I'm going to probably go back to having the thicker stuff over that, so you can see how just in one painting you can use all kinds of different techniques with the acrylics.